The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Thursday, February 16th, 2023. How you doing today, Dane?
Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing alright, doing alright. Yeah, we're getting ready for the big rain that's coming here, so we'll try to keep it tight here today, and the viewing at present might be off and on because of the rain coming in and out, but we'll still cover what's happened this past week here.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to discuss because some of the instruments that we've seen in the past get influenced by the rain, so we'll talk about a little bit of that, but mostly go over the past week, which includes that magnitude 4.8 earthquake the other night. We'll talk about that and also some of the seismic stations and how they've gone offline for the public at least. All right, so I think we can go ahead and get into it at that point.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, and thanks for leading the chat. Going to be leading a discussion in the chat, taking questions that we'll try to weave in as we can, or after we run through the program here. And yeah, let us know if you have any issues with our audio or our video. We're trying to continually tweak things and adjust stuff, so there's a little bit of new software, and just let us know if anything's going wrong there. Appreciate that, you guys. Thanks for sticking with us. All right, so all that said, let's get into it here with our this week's Hawaiian Volcano Summary. Is showing here the view from the S1 camera from USGS HVO for the last 4 days or so. showing the new configuration of lava output on the surface of the volcano. So you have here on this western side, the left side of the image here, the central vent that has taken over the main volume of lava output. Most of the lava is coming out here. And secondarily, it's still coming out where it was before in the southern vent of the eastern lake over here. But what happened was, following the last deflation-inflation cycle, as the pressure returned to the volcano, the lava came back first at the central vent, and for a full 18 hours left this eastern basin drained. It only had 2 small ponds within it. And then the lava from this central vent poured into this eastern basin and refilled it, and was shortly followed thereafter by the resumption of the southern fountain there, which is still going but is not putting out as much lava as the central vent. So that's the main change in the volcano. Just in the surface outlet, how the lava makes its way up and through the crust. This entire crusted crater floor, that's about 300 acres or so, is still continuously uplifting as lava injects below that crust there. So we're just looking at the pathway through that crust out onto the surface and before it recirculates back into that lower part beneath the crust. And that's what we're seeing here this week. So that's the view from the S1 camera. I also wanted to share that view, similar view from the F1 thermal camera from the USGS, and I'll zoom it in here. It's worth noting that this entire time, here's our central vent and our eastern lake are now in a background here. But this entire time, our western basin with its hosted lake is steadily circulating the entire time. Lava's coming up beneath the crust somewhere and it's kind of splitting perhaps. And this area in the west has been steady and persistent. There's a small pathway into the southeast pit here, and that might be more intermittent because you see this thing flashing off and on. But the western pit certainly has been steady here. Looking at that eastern activity in the thermal here, you really can see this is really sped up. But following that last deflation-inflation event, where this back basin goes this darker blue color as its surface lava cools, drains away, you see just the 2 ponds that remain there and there. And you see the burst from the center here that first spreads outwards to the north and to the south, and then eventually spills over to the east to refill that basin in there. That's the view from the thermal, summing up the activity this past week. And I thought I would just add couple other things in here. One is to note that we did have a 4.8 earthquake in Deep Pahala that occurred a few days ago. That was felt statewide. I've seen reports all the way to Kauai. I'm showing you guys here just the USGS reports map of island-wide and showing as far as Honolulu here. But there's been no changes to either volcano of Kīlauea or Mauna Loa from this activity, this earthquake. It's part of the deep plumbing system of the volcano that doesn't really affect the surface action that much. So just note that occurred. And finally, just to touch base on Mauna Loa, we have this map from Firms that Dane pulled for us, showing that heat signal of Kilauea. There's a small wildfire, brush fire that was occurring over by Waikoloa. And it's also showing here the area of Mauna Loa, the lava flows where they are the thickest, still putting out a heat signal, so they're still cooling there, not so much from the caldera or the upper ridge here, but more so on the lower slopes where it's thicker and retaining most of that heat. So that's the Hawaiian Volcano summary for this week. And that said, we'll get into more of the details, starting with Kilauea here. And let's start off with our visuals and our chronology put out by the USGS on February 12th here. So let's put the proper caption here on our observations, our practice of kilo observing. And we have noted by the USGS the shifting vent activity in Halemaʻumaʻu. So here is an image by Dr. Matt Patrick showing that fountain that's coming up through that central pond. And that's the vent that I'm referring to. It's, the vent is really submerged underneath all this stuff on top of it, actual magma below the crust itself, and then the lava that's coming up and through. But nonetheless, it's coming up here and actually fountaining, and where it's falling to the side, it's actually creating this spatter feature, right, a spatter cone that has been growing, collapsing, growing, collapsing. We'll look at that in more detail here in a bit. But it's mostly feeding now this established channel that's heading off to the east, that's into that eastern basin there. So here's that zoomed out view, similar to what we just saw from the S1 camera, also imaged by Dr. Patrick, showing that pathway as it comes across here and over and in. So we'll look at the thermal images and the night and day for better views of this, but I want to start off with that sequence of photographs. And they also have released here for us a few video clips, right? Noting this was taken on the 14th now, so a couple of days later and a couple of days ago as we currently broadcast. And this is showing, I'll start playing here. There, the wide angle view. Zooming in and see that spattering of the southern fountain there. And it's harder to see the spattering of the central fountain because it's now obscured by that spatter cone that's in the foreground there. So we're zoomed in, we see the white-tailed tropic bird, that Kīlauea, fly by there. Still fountaining southern vent within that eastern lake, and you see not just that main source, but a couple other spots further over to the east there where you're having crustal overturning processes, gas building up beneath the crust and then bursting through and the whole thing overturns. So there you had a zoomed in at the southern fountain. Here is zoomed into that central fountain, a river of lava, and yeah, we just got photobombed by that Kīlauea once again there. So that is the video release from the USGS this week. Now we'll turn to the webcam captures, and mahalo to the USGS for making the cameras available, and mahalo to Andre for the time-lapse server he's running there and allowing us to compile these for you guys. So I thought I'd start off with just the image of what's happened the last week. And so here we are on the 8th, coming to the 9th. You see this first big overflows from the central pit here. Then you see the actual eastern pit cooled off, right, before it gets refilled by the lava coming in here. And that entire time, as I mentioned, the western pit here in the foreground is circulating steadily. So maybe what I'll do here is I'll pull it back one more time, but I want to really zoom in on it now so you can see this sequence a little better on the screen here. So here we go. Our deflation begins. We have two small ponds here on the edges. Actually, maybe use a third one on the back there. And there is that spillover north and south, and then it runs into the basin to the east here. And if you look at the timestamps, which I'm not showing you guys in this particular view, but it's about 1 a.m. that you see the first outburst from this central vent area. And it seems to be around 1900, 7 p.m. or so when you start seeing the first spillovers into the lake, and it accelerates from there on and on and on. So we actually went 18 hours where the central pit was actually erupting and that back basin was not filled there. So I thought I would compile the whole eruption. So here we are going back to January, that larger lake withdrawing, and you see some of these other bad frames are still in here, but I thought I'd just keep everything in for completeness. You see the ooze-ups beginning here on the bottom. We'll eventually see ooze-ups coming in from the side as well, but we first see the eastern lake overflowing, ooze-ups occurring, then the central pit starts putting out more of its overflows as well. First, they end up being small little pads, and they get further and further. Occasionally you get this one of these big bursts that precedes the deflation-inflation. And then finally, here is our big burst at the end. And so really it's one of the more noticeable and obvious changes on the surface that we've seen, but really it's just the nozzle. It's very dramatic and fascinating, but doesn't really change any of the prognosis for threat. There's still no increased threat to people. It's still perfectly safe. Lava's not going anywhere through any of the rift zones. It's still in the summit area within that big basin that I like to call the lava stadium. So really it's a time for great viewing. Even the guys like Two Pineapples who are up there streaming all the time are saying something new just about every week, which is, I think, really, really awesome, and sharing that with all of you guys as well. So yeah, it's really the era of viewing right now up in the lava stadium. The big challenge, of course, is the weather and trying to snatch a glimpse in between, but you might be surprised what you actually can see in between. So that was a little bit faster than before, but I thought I would do it one more time here, and then we'll speed it up even more. So you can really see that retreat of the lake, the spillover phase, ooze-up starting to come in, overflows from the central pit, that first draining of that eastern lake. There's a second one, and then finally the spillover that comes and refills it. So really fascinating. I only have this going through about 12 hours ago this morning, so we'll look at a little more here, and I know there's continuing to be evolution of that area still, so catch up here, but I thought to really make this clear, I would speed the entire eruption up into 1 second here. So here it is, all in 1 second, and you see a whole lot of flashing and kind of retreating the overall contraction pattern of the eruption back in here. You see the steady activity of this west pit over here. The ooze-ups flash in the foreground, but I really want you to notice, if you can, maybe I'll try to zoom it in a little more, is that the whole crater floor is actually uplifting too. You actually see a series of cracks occur, like in this zone right in here, that kind of open up from that dark blue to a little pinkish and yellowish, and then they close back up again. You can see that actually is like stretching and then getting recompressed as the whole thing is lifting up from below. And you see that ooze-up phase that comes in the bottom here is actually part of that, and likewise, the other parts of the crater floor and ooze-ups, it's because that entire crater floor is lifting like this. So this is one angle to see it. I don't think the thermal actually shows it the best, so we'll move on from the thermal image now and look at the B1 camera. And here it is, same view but updated for the whole eruption to today. And you can clearly see the crater floor bulging. It's almost doing a little hula here, right? It's because at the very beginning there was a little bit of a drop on this closer edge of the camera, and almost like it rolls towards the viewer here as it swells up. So a lot of cool stuff to look at. There's that rolling part of it right there in the foreground. It's almost like eye tricks, but here, let me zoom into this northwest corner over here. You can see the set of cracks that had occurred before as the crater had sagged before. And you see that series of cracks. I'll let my line disappear here. You see them actually come close as this whole crater floor is uplifting and closing that gap, and you see it's bulging at the edges and bulging in the middle, and it actually moves almost with that wave on this side as well. So really fascinating to note that, right? It helps you really imagine that really thick magma body below there, and even if you have a 30 or 60 foot crust over top of that thing, the whole thing is actually still hot enough and plastic enough to actually be able to bend and bow over top of that as it deforms there. So it's really, really cool. And I thought I'd pan over here and show you guys the actual main lava perch pond area. Right? So here it is. You can see the perch pond actually be building up, but you also see that the whole perched walls of the pond are actually also undulating up and downwards, and more upwards than down over time as it's getting filled and pushed from below. You can also see really well what we were noting at the beginning of this eruption. This was a small little islet that occurred when the lake was all the way to the base of the eastern cliff here, and built this little promontory atop of it, and all that has been buried by overflows of this inner pond. So really fascinating to see that progression updated once again as well. And then I'll just zoom it back out so you can try to take it all in together if you can, right? There's all kinds of little details, and I won't go any further than that, but all the different parts are moving in slightly different ways there, which is really fascinating. So that's the B1 camera. For the last week here, the views aren't that great from this angle with all the rain and distance of the view, so we'll just leave that for the B1 and move on to our KW camera. And likewise, I thought I would compile, following in Andre's model there, another really quick whole eruption daytime only view of the crater floor lifting. And so this is that wide angle KW view. I zoom it in for you guys a little more. It's a little more obvious. You can watch this foreground, right? Obviously there's some wind and the camera shakes a tiny bit, but hopefully you can still see the whole thing bulging upwards, more so in the middle first, then the cracks, and then coming in on the edges. And that's a different view of that. Right? And meanwhile, here in the background is the changing lake configuration. So we'll slow it down here and show you guys the KW back here view for the last week. So visually for the last week, here's what the volcano looked like. We had that, it's always reliable western lake, but then this extra burst from the central pit, then refill the eastern basin. So now you have both the western basin full of lava and the eastern basin full of lava, and you have fountaining in the central pit that's putting lava out towards the east. And presently, this is the kind of view that's you might get with all the sure rain falling on there and everything steaming and obscuring the view like that. So pretty interesting place that it stops here too. All right, so that's the KW. And we'll now move on to the S1. And the S1 did undergo a camera move, but we can see here at the beginning the actual draining phase of the deflationary phase, and here coming in from the left was the overflows. Then we zoom out, and now we have the central vent and the eastern lake both on screen as we showed you in our opening sequence here. But here we have the full day and night for the last week, so you really can see what that current configuration actually looks like there. Right, and so I know it's a lot of flashing back and forth. I thought what I would do to help illustrate what's happening within the lake there is take out the daytime views and let's focus just on the night. And let's see how this turns out here. So I've taken out, so we're looking at just the nighttime views. Once they've moved the camera, then I didn't quite take all of them out. There's a few flashes here, still in here. But you can still see there, pretty steady coming out of that central vent. There's some overflows that occur off to the north periodically from various spots all across here. You have this extra little bay that was part of that central pond, right? That was more of the pond area like this. And now that you have this channel leading out of here, this is forming a little bit of that crust, but it's interesting how that's forming that extra little bay there. And moving over, this is a part I really did this for, was to show you guys where the lava comes into the eastern basin here. That actually first came into this little wedge between this piece of highland and has been wedging it, and you can actually clearly see it rocking. I mean, it's rocking because I'm looping it, right? But it's moving from west to east here, being pushed by this overflow. So this is not exactly an island. It's still attached here at this back end, but you can imagine that the lava that's flowing all in this direction, it seems to just disappear. It's probably going into some kind of sink that's connected to this main lake all through here in that area, right? So similar to this, the lava goes off to the north and just disappears. It probably hits some kind of sink that recirculates it back beneath the crust at that point. So it's really, this is the fascinating part, right? How it's coming and wedging in and really moving that thing. And it'll be interesting to see if this actually breaks apart and becomes its own little island, and if this enlarges or if it sustains this kind of feature. And I thought this was pretty fascinating, Dane, when we were looking at this, just looking at this now, how we compare this to how it looked a year ago. We actually had a different part of the crater, but same camera was looking at a vent on the west side with a channel that was pouring into a pit just east of it. And that pit to the east of it's now our current western pit, right? It's kind of offset on the other side of the central island, but it looks kind of similar in that configuration there. And eventually what happened was that whole lava pathway got crusted over in the west and fed a lava tube, and we just had a glowing spot, and then a gap, and then the circulating lake. And I wonder if we'll evolve, if it'll stay steady long enough to do something like that. You have any thoughts?
Yeah, it is interesting just how it's been rotating around the action inside the crater, right? And it seems to me that one of the thoughts that I had last time was when we stopped the eruption, right? And the new dike propagated to start this eruption. And that was like interesting to me because it already had an open conduit, and it was easier to split new rock and make a new one than it was to go back through that. So there's some weird, I mean, the conceptualization of this whole lava mixture, this all these different areas that are dried and then areas that are still molten and whatever else is in that lava lake is really makes it a complex area to look at.
Yeah, it's hard to even track all the changes that have occurred over time, right? I mean, one thing that comes to mind for me is, the crater is kind of flared, right? So when we did have that previous configuration, it was actually a much smaller crater. It's really quite a bit wider now, so it's actually quite a bit narrower. And as that thing lifted up over time, you imagine that pathway that originally was coming up out of the crater wall into that western vent had to kind of migrate over and over and over and over and over and over. And maybe it's just easier now to not take that turn, and you can just go straight up, right? And
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I have no idea, like that first lava lake that it put down back in 2020, and then solidified the top. Yeah, it's the smallest of the lakes. My question is once we put another layer on top of it, does the whole thing rise? Or is it just the top layer that's rising type of thing? When we see these, the surface of the lake rise, right? Because we have it's a layered cake that we're working with, right? Do all the layers rise, or is it just the top that we're looking at?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I my intuition tells me, it's true. There could be some multiple horizons in there, right, with like different crusted layers. But it seems like we've seen a lot of the time the crust actually rising fairly coherently through the years. So I imagine that you have that frothy crust and everything is injecting below that, and so you only see some fraction of what gets put into the volcano to the surface, and some ends up under the crust, lifting it upwards, and some ends up circulating on top where you actually can see it and photograph it and all that. But that's just like the fizzle that's kind of squirting out, while really the whole thing is lifting up like a giant piston. That's the real action.
Yeah, and then if you're lifting that bottom plug up, then that makes sense for it to migrate over to the side, maybe the western or wherever that it's decided to go to.
Right. Yeah, and interesting that, so it's interesting. We saw the burst of gas last week and a week before that, right? Maybe that kind of cleared that straight up pathway a little more, because I still didn't want to come straight up. It started off coming up through that central vent. That eruption actually began, if you remember that whole lava tsunami video, right, where it burst up and those big surges coming outwards. That came from that central vent area. So that was the first spot that erupted, and then it migrated to the south part of that eastern vent after that, and now it's back. It's really fascinating to see how it's going back and forth there. And now that the central vent has picked up, the southern vent has reemerged, but it's definitely more subdued. It's not putting out as much lava as before. It doesn't seem like, right? I should mention, if I scroll it all the way over here, there is still that spot all the way in the northeast that's putting a little bit of lava, kind of a little bit separate there. That was that separate little pond that we saw last week too. So a lot of cool stuff here. I can move on to the V1 camera. Let's do that. Here's what it looked like before it was moved. So this is that kind of draining sequence, right? So the deflationary part of the lava lake was full. The eastern lake with its southern fountain was dominant. That was a steady state at that point. Lava starts dropping down. You see these islets drifting, eventually parking themselves, and you just see these little ponds by the southern vent and by the ones in the northeast and north part of that pond as well. So then they actually move the camera. There's a bit of a focus issue there, but once it comes back online, here's what it looks like. We have that central vent here, and there it is feeding that river that bends down into that eastern lake that begins kind of right in here. So that's the steady stream of the lava through that pathway and out. I'm going to play it again, and now I'm going to focus in the cone. So the cone itself has been growing. You can see it grow, then it cuts back and grows and cuts back. And every time it's cutting back, is the big chunk of it's over heavy. It's falling into the lava stream here, and it's getting rafted away or reabsorbed, or something's happening to it. I don't really see many islets or anything floating down this channel at any point in time. But you see, it's pretty persistent. This building and collapsing aspect of the cone. Right, and you see it growing really fast here in the front, but also the back slope is growing as well, and the material picking up. And here's how it happens. You see these occasional flashes of red as the lava is spattering up and over, and that's when it's adding volume, adding weight, and then eventually collapsing in itself. So that is the V1 camera there after they recentered it, following that return to prominence of the central vent there. And we do have some other documentation of this, but we'll pivot to lava viewing reports, since these are all images taken from the viewing areas, right? So starting with the National Park Service, Janice Way, mahalo for sharing as always. Here is her video showing the spattering from that central vent. This is in real time here, so you can see it actually moving, and there goes the edge of that cone sliding in. And there's some chunks of it still floating around in there. But you see it's just continuous vigorous spattering, maybe a little bit more spattering Maybe it's shaking things up, right? It's stirring and allowing those gas bubbles to move within that viscous lava there, and you get some nice fountaining here right afterwards too. So really cool to see that. And not to be left out, our reliable friends Two Pineapples also have a view and version of this, right? So there they are live streaming, and this is part of a much longer stream, which is fantastic. You guys can go and see different views, and it's like a different chunk of cone falling in, right? So 2 different events there. But that's something where if you're up there and looking, you might well catch one of those as well. That seems to be what's going on now, if you can look into the crater there and see it. So that's one example of what's been visible. I thought I would add another short clip here from Two Pineapples, and here's a panned out view. So there is that eastern or central fountain and eastern lake here. This is from the area of Kilauea overlook that has the view of both the eastern lake and that central fountain. Over at Wikahuna, you can see more of the eastern lake, but less of the fountain. And walking, moving further over to the east, you get more of the weather effects in there, right? So that's Kilauea overlook seems to be the current best place to see this view of activity. However, you cannot see the western lake from there, right? So if you want to see all of it all together, you probably need to be at Kanakakoi, and the extra effort it takes to get out there. So you saw the nice panned out view, then zoomed in here to the fountain here. I thought I would also show you guys Stephen Groce here, or Gross. I'm not sure how we say his name here. Apologies, Stephen, and mahalo. Valentine's Day morning. Similar view. This looks like a maybe Uekahuna. And would also throw in here Bojack Key, Kilauea by moonlight. And first I'll just, that's not what I was trying to do. First I'll come in and maybe zoom this in a little bit. So this also looks like it's Kilauea overlook area, and there you can see that eastern lake, and this is, you can see not in the last couple of days because you can see this central pit over here glowing but not actually putting out all the lava yet. This is just before all this change occurred. But I still wanted to include this in here because of what he shares here, right? And I'll just read this little part here. Moments before and after this photo was taken, the rain was coming down sideways. You couldn't see the lava because the crater was filled with fog, the moon was completely obscured by cloud, and Pele's plume was non-existent. He sits up and waits, and sure enough, it cleared up, and he managed to get a few frames in before the weather came in again. So, if this is your only time to come and visit Kilauea, and you're up there and the weather looks just looking terrible, don't despair, right? You're probably going to get wet, but you might be able to stick it out and get some amazing views like this. And one of the nice things is you actually see all the areas of the crater floor steaming wherever they're hot too, so you get all this extra steam and play of the glow on the steam everywhere that it wafts and all of that. So that's really cool as well. So those are some viewer submissions here from Hawaii Tracker, as well as our friends to Pineapple. Mahalo all you guys to contribute to our lava viewing report today. I thought I would throw in the live stream here. Let's reload this and see if we can see through any of the weather at present, and the answer is no. So let's just pause this for a second here and move on. Let's load the current webcams from the USGS site and see what you can see. There's a KW. It's pretty socked in at the moment. You can see the lava in there, in that west pit from that angle. There's a thermal, reliable, but just to, while we're looking at this, one thing that has happened is you see the color scale shift a lot, and sometimes things might look like they're less hot, like the stuff in the background looks less hot than the foreground. It's probably just more obscured by fume at present, so you gotta be a little more careful during these rainy weather times of these kind of indicators. Oh boy, there's our the V1, not seeing anything. The S1 seeing a little bit. Everything's still going as before, right? Eruption still in the same configuration. B1, yeah, it's pretty wet up here. But I did want to come into our most recent F1 camera. So there is a most recent loop with that kind of faded out background there, but let's go to the last 24-hour animation here. This is only giving us a frame every hour, but still I thought I could use this to point out this new patch of lava that seems to have emerged just behind the central vent over here. It's still between the island. The island's edge, the central island is right in here, so it seems to be right at the edge of there, where we know there's been another outlet that's in the past has put out lava as well. It's had a little hornado that actually overlapped onto the central island before that got knocked over. So it's an area of weakness that we've seen in the past. And interesting to note that the output of lava now is enough to sustain all of this, but maybe if it is shifting more towards this area here, maybe it actually is finding another weak path and leaking out right through there. So just note that there is a little bit of that happening as well. So the process is still ongoing. We'll have to see next week what occurs next here. But just to note that things are changing. You never know what you're going to see if you head out there, and you might be the only one looking out, right? But yeah, definitely prepare for the weather. Be aware of all the conditions and heed warnings and closures and all of that, right? Especially the roads. So all that said, there's also the National Park website. Check the website for any closures and delays, orientation with a map, with different views there. Focusing on a map, just to highlight Kilauea overlook is this overlook here on the north side, right? So Wikahuna, where I've often recommended in the past, seems to be a little bit too far over. The sweet spot kind of is in here, maybe not exactly on the pavement by the rail, but you have to kind of wander a little bit to get the best view. And then the wet side, but Kanakako'i being the next best likely over here, with possible views also available in this whole Kupina'i Pali area, Waldron's Ledge, to the edge of Kilauea all through here as well. Right, that's usually better if we're seeing that backside western vent, and so it's also a bigger span here, right? So when you have this kind of weather, it's maybe a little less likely you see it from that far away, but when you get to in here or in here, really you only needed to clear in this little area right in here for you to see anything. So that's kind of how I think of it anyways. So that is the lava viewing report. Of course, there is air quality to be concerned with as well, and seeing as the lava is still constrained within that crater, contained even within that crater, it's not flowing out to affect anyone. It's just the gas is putting out that's creating fog and particulates that can be the biggest hazard to people here. So here's air quality from the National Park. Here's the charts looking back over the last 24 hours, and at present everything is showing, well, not everything, mostly showing green. Looks like we had a SO2 spike at steam vents very briefly when I was looking earlier today. Oh, here I saw something like this as well. At Wikahuna yesterday, particulate matter in the evening, right, and a little bit this morning as well. So you have a lot of rain, but in between these times of rain, you actually can get these clear times, but you also might get some fog during those times as well. And it could actually be more concentrated and localized in certain areas because of the stronger winds. Park is looking good at present, but certainly be aware of their signage and their advice there. All right, so here is our VMAP VOG dashboard showing our updated SO2 emission rate of close to 2,000 tons per day coming from Kilauea, Mauna Loa not putting out any gas. But here is a forecast combining the winds, topography, and all of that, predicting concentrations of VOG. So you still have some heavy occurrence down the southwest part of the island, Pahalana-Lehu Ocean View as usual. But also later you'll see it's actually going to swing around into the Saddle region, right? So you actually may get Saddle, Waikoloa area, Maokakona, it's hard to tell exactly, right? So obviously a lot of weather, a lot of wind. You might not notice anything, or you might suddenly get a really strong whiff and think, oh, what was that? Where did it come from? And maybe this gives you something to refer to, if that's the case. So that's the forecast, and we can come in, as usual, to our Purple Air Citizen Scientist network of weather sensors, and presently everything is mostly in the green, occasionally borderline yellow, but yeah, even areas that are currently in the green, like Pahala, right now showing a 0. You can see that over the last week, it's comes and goes, right? It actually came into the yellow once, twice, 3 times, came into the red once last night, and came into close to the orange earlier today. So not constant, but it can come in concentrated from time to time. So that is our volcanic hazards. We'll make sure to cover our monitoring graphs here. So let's turn to that data next. And when we have all this extra steam in a crater, the laser rangefinder is not always happy. And so it looks like what happened here on the 14th is a laser rangefinder bounced off some cloud, and it thought that there was a actual real measurement of depth. And so it's putting in this excursion. Once the fog clears, it goes back to normal back in here. But the consequence is you end up having the scale of depth on the side that's not showing a whole lot of detail as far as a change in the blue line, which is what we really care about. But it does still show this steady upwards. It's climbing a pixel here and another pixel, and then it's looking like it's basically steady right there, right? And that's all we can tell from this graph. And it's worth noting this is within that steadier western lake as well, so you're not going to see those variations up and down that you would in other areas. The tilt, here it is for the last week, corresponding to the same time period there. So as we broadcast 1 week ago, we were just in the beginning of this deflation-inflation event. And as expected, the inflation phase came right after midnight that evening and returned the tilt back to its previous steady level there. And it's been fairly steady over the last week. You see a little bit of variation up and down, but this is only 0.5 microradians. It's barely anything. It's more, I think of it as a steady high. And we've seen that with that constant effusion of lava from the central vent that entire time. We do also have on here this big spike. That's that 4.8 earthquake that we'll talk about. Occurred in Deep Pahala. Did not affect the volcano. You see the tilt is just continues as if nothing had happened. And no change there at all. So zooming out to the last month, you still have the same issue with the lava depth here, but you can still see a little steady rise. Looking at the tilt is more interesting, because you start to see that declining phase we were in before. And really, since we've seen this change and these couple bursts from that central vent, and now the return of effusion to that as its main source, a much steadier, almost flatline tilt, right? There was that first deflation-inflation we saw 2 weeks ago, then a one last week. If it holds about the same pattern, you might think, oh, there could be another one coming. No, there could be, or there could not be. We'll just see what she does there, but it wouldn't be surprising to see another burst. But on the other hand, these could have just been the clearing for this big burst of effusion we see now, and it might take a while to finish that phase before it can actually go through a DI cycle once again. Who knows? Just kind of speculating and talking about the processes here that might help you yourself think about what might be happening under. None of us will have the right answer, but we all have fun thinking about it. When there's no threat to people here, of course, right? So the last month of earthquakes, pretty steady overall, pretty low levels. You see a little bit of a jump in the last couple of days. That's got to do with that recent earthquake and aftershocks activity as well. There's not really a whole lot of change. We'll note that. And here's our SO2, 2,000 tons per day at the bottom, 3,200 at the top. So the variations are all within that normal range that's typical for eruptions long term on Kilauea summit. Maybe it's trending down. Hard to tell with so few data points, but if you zoom out from the last month to here the last year, it does look a little more convincing that we actually spiked high and that it's coming in a downward trend like that. So looking at the earthquakes for the last year, you can see there's that pre-eruption build-up time, and we have nothing like that going on here. It's essentially pretty calm, if anything, a little bit lower than usual. And GPS is where it gets interesting again. So the upper GPS is a summit, north and south across the summit. Here's where eruption onset occurs. Then the volcano starts to contract as it's relieving that built-up pressure. Seemed like it had flatlined last week, and now it maybe is turning up a little bit. In any case, it's not going down. It's either flatlined or it's starting to turn up a little bit here. So it's starting to show that similar turn as the tilt, right? Showing that's more of a steady state. Like it's expended its first burst there, and now it's going to establish a long-term feeder, perhaps, is what happened the last time it did this. On Pu'o'o, the GPS is still showing the same very welcome boring downward trend here. We like that it keeps contracting and not doing anything, so it's kind of boring, but that's good. Not ready for that quite yet, I don't think, yeah. Although hopefully we're getting there. As far as preparedness in our community is what I mean. As for something else moving within the rift zone here, but does not look like any of that's happening now, and thus no more threat to people still. Okay, so that's the actual series of graphs. I'm going to cover a couple more of these earthquake maps. Here's the last week of earthquakes on Kilauea. You see really not a whole lot at the summit, mostly in Pahala, so kind of leave it at that and move on from there. I won't spend a lot of time on daily updates today. They were, this week, not quite as descriptive as some of the previous weeks. I've praised them in the past when they were extra descriptive, and I think this week I'll have to say the opposite, because what we have here is we have on the 10th, this is the day after update, this is that moment where we saw that eastern lake drained and lava coming from the central pit and starting to, hadn't actually gone into the eastern basin yet, but the update at that point in time was unchanged from the USGS. They do note that the smaller pond in the central portion of the crater floor remains active with several expansive overflows in the last 24 hours. They still note 3 lava locations, noting the southern small lava pond's activity is diminished, and actually this gets dropped and not really mentioned anymore the rest of the week, and we're sticking with 3 locations from now on, apparently. So there it is on Saturday, pretty much the same text, 3 locations. Central part of the crater floor, nearly continuous expansive overflows in the last 24 hours. And then coming to Sunday, we see same text as Saturday, and then finally on Monday, we get a little bit more. Eruption and lava in 3 locations continued. The eastern lake remains active, remains about 25 acres in size, with the small southern fountain still being active. The smaller lava pond in the central portion of the crater floor also has an active small lava fountain with nearly continuous expansive overflows over the last day, and channels from the small central lava pond seem to connect to the larger eastern lake. The western lake in the basin, the 2021-22 lava lake, remains active. So that's the most complete update of the week there. Nothing else is changing there. Coming to Tuesday, we do get a new SO2 measurement of 2,000 tons per day measured on February 13th. And otherwise, we still have channels from the small central pond to the eastern lake, and we really don't have any more evolution of our text update over the last couple of days here, right? So there is the Wednesday update, and here is the Thursday update from today. No significant changes, and the same text. I won't read it again for you guys there, but that's just noting our source here and augmenting it a little bit from their own web cameras, that we can see a little bit more detail than was described in the text here. So we'll move on to the earthquakes, and we'll show you this live earthquake map. And here I have highlighted the 4.8 Pahala that occurred on the 14th. So there it is in the middle of this cluster, right? A depth of 32 kilometers, that's 20 miles or so. This is at the larger end of the range of these earthquakes that we've seen in this area, but we have seen some other 4-pointers on Dane. I don't remember exactly the size, but there have been a few other 4-pointers over 4 or 5 in this area.
Yeah.
If I zoom it out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we talk about that, I think the upper threshold we've seen is, or thought about, was like a 5.0 in that area from those deep Pahala earthquakes, but we've seen them get close, and this might be the closest one to that 5.0 number, but yeah, we've had a few over 4.5, if I remember right, and not counting that 5.0 that was related to Mauna Loa, because it was much shallower.
Right.
That was a whole different thing, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so still, for the area, a big one for sure. It was felt all over the place. We'll come to that in a second, but just to show you guys that besides that, here's Kilauea with not a whole lot, some south flank action, and there's Mauna Loa with really not a whole lot, some background activity elsewhere in the island. So really, it's just the Pahala earthquake we had to talk about this week. There's not anything else seismically worth noting for the data. Let's go to the event page, and here is the map of felt reports from statewide. So here you do see in Kauai, someone felt it with intensity of 4, right? That's pretty intense for it being that far away. You can see it was fairly intense, intensity of 4 throughout most of the reporting area. But if you zoom it in, you can see that especially down Pahala area, Ocean View, Ka'u, and even where I am near Volcano, I felt a pretty good jolt here. I think when I filled my report out, it came out to like a 5. And my data point didn't show up on here, right? Maybe because I was on the second floor of my house or something, perhaps. But in any case, there is the distribution of how widely that was actually felt, and no impact on the volcanoes. There was a HVO information statement about the earthquake. There it is, 9:27 p.m. on the 14th, depth of 20 miles, 32 kilometers. Part of the seismic storm under Pahala, which has been ongoing since 2019. Observed as far back as the 1960s, right, when the first instruments were put in. So moderate shaking, intensity of 5 there was the maximum, but not really any damage. It was just a kind of jolting, really, right? So no changes to the volcanoes. But here is a user submitted shot. Mahalo to Chris in Ocean View submitting. See his drawers got jolted ajar there. Right, so just a little example of some of the impact there, what it actually is like. So what I thought I would show you guys is just recapping this article, The Magmatic Web Beneath Hawaii, that came out in Science by John Wilding, Wei Chang Ju, Zachary Ross, and Jennifer Jackson from the Caltech seismic group there. And this was a paper that came out on December 22nd, and really it's going to focus on the image here, right? That helps explain this whole process. There is that zone of deep Pahala earthquakes that occurs here beneath both volcanoes. Let me scroll it up a little bit there, right? There's Kilauea, Mauna Loa, and all the greenish stuff is all the magma pathways, the rift zones of Kilauea here and here, and there's its magma chambers, shallower and deeper ones. And way down here below that is the pathway, and so it's not connected to the volcanoes very closely. It is connected, absolutely, but it's a part of that deeper pathway that's a little longer term there. So that's why it's pretty typical. We don't see any impact of these deep earthquakes on the surface here. So I won't go any deeper into it than that. However, before we leave seismic, I just wanted to note here that there have been some outages of the USGS instruments that we have been informed of. So if you come to the USGS page here, for example, and you look at this instrument site, let's go to Kilauea, for example, here. You can click on a triangle. I'll pick this one as Wikahuna broadband and click on it, and you can see here in this case, we have data. Here's the last 48 hours of seismograph on Wikahuna broadband. But there are some stations, like, let's pick one. Try that one. Nahuku.
It's the ones that are off. The ones that are off island are the ones that are primarily having issues. Anything that's off a big island is basically down.
So here is Nahuku, and Nahuku is totally blank. And if you look at some of the other stations in the area are also, so it's kind of hit or miss. And yeah, as Dane says, the stuff off island more so. And Dane, would you like to give us an update on that? Oh. Well, something's going on here. I don't know if anyone can hear me. I can hear you, Dane. I'm not sure what's happening right now. Close this page, maybe. Yeah, I don't know if you can.
Phil.
Let's see if this
Occasionally,
comes.
the lag is terrible.
All right, let's see if that's any better. Have we stabilized it all? Can you hear me now, Dane?
Yeah, but I do not see the stream going. Oh, is it? Is it picked back up? All right. I think we're back. Well,
Apologies for that, you
apparently what
guys.
we tried there to fix that issue did not work. So now we know.
No,
All right.
and so yeah, that's one thing, and yeah, we have another suspect website there as well. I had to close that tab to make things work again here. The USGS site did not play well.
Yeah, that
So in
map
any
of
case,
theirs is not the best coded nowadays. It's kind of old and type of thing.
yeah. So any update on that, Dane? On the seismic update, seismic instrumentations.
Yeah. So talked to USGS and they were saying that they're offline because of network reconfigurations, and that the data is being recorded is just not being shared publicly right now, and they'll backfill the data once they get it online again. So hopefully soon. But yeah, I mean when like the vast majority of the stations all go offline at the same time, it's usually something along the lines of a network issue or reconfigurations or all kinds of things along those lines, right? But yeah, hopefully they'll get it figured out. It can be pretty complex though, those systems, especially all these legacy systems interworking with each other. And we're going through a bunch of weather. So yeah.
It's probably why they want to reconfigure them, right? It's probably not very efficient. So like call it a growing pain, right?
Right. But yeah, I've seen a bunch of people not happy about that, and they're hiding earthquakes. It's like, man, guys, like, come on. And like even without those seismic stations, as that magnitude 4.8 showed, we still have enough stations online to do what we need to do. It's just at like the academic level, they're not going to be able to, at this on the fly without being able to get the raw data from USGS, right? Because it's still being recorded, and even with what we have, we can still use them, right? The several seismic stations that are online.
So that's the earthquakes. Apart from this other curiosity of what's happening on Twitter that involves this video and also the earthquakes, if you'd like to take us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So the reposting of information online is really something that is problematic in a lot of ways, just because people take old footage and then repost it with zero care, and it's not usually like a person that made an honest mistake. No, it's usually bots and things like that, lines that are just in it for the clicks and just in it to get interactions and drive numbers and things like that. And so this, about 3 days ago, started seeing this video pop up. This one is taken, I believe this is just Fisher 7 from Leilani Estates Boulevard, looking to the east. Pretty confident on that one. And it would be early on in the eruption, 2018, early on in May. Pretty easy to track down where this footage came from. But that doesn't stop the internet, so this footage now has, I believe it'd probably be over 4 million views over the past 3 days. And the footage came out before the magnitude 4.8, like a day and a half before. Then as soon as the 4.8 happened, and these are all people saying like, oh yeah, it's erupting again, and the Kilauea is back in there, outside the caldera. As soon as the 4.8 happened, they're like, yeah, the 4.8 triggered an eruption. They just shifted, right? Instantly, without a beat missed, just incorporated the 4.8 into the misinformation they were already spewing. So yeah, we got a bunch of these. I mean, there's a whole compilation of these guys that are reposting, resharing, and just continuing to spread this crazy stuff, right? And again, I don't think most of these people are real people. These are bots. These have it's all programmatic, and they have whatever agenda they're trying to do. And yeah, right now they picked up on Kilauea, and it is just gonna, continue to run until they run that horse into the ground.
Yeah, that's frustrating, but it's also why we're here, why we do what we do, because at least there's a voice of reason out here, right? Something to come and refer to. And yeah, frustrating. It's we're never going to tame the internet, I don't think.
No.
But we can help educate our viewers about the kind of stuff that's rampant out there. If you haven't seen it yet already, or you obviously know what to discern a little bit, but certainly share that discernment if you can with everyone else you talk to who's spreading this junk. Yeah.
Yep, and it's pretty prominent now. I mean, one video I was looking at this morning had 3 million views on it. 3 million. That's more views than like we get in during Mauna Loa, or that's close to what we got during Mauna Loa, on one BS reposted video that's a complete fabrication, basically. Right, and that's just like the numbers are ridiculous in how the internet works, and that's it's not like we're crying like, oh, you got to listen to us. It's like, guys, just you got to try at least a little bit.
Yeah, no, go listen. Yeah,
a little bit.
Right. If the SGS isn't posting it, if we're not posting it, if it's just some guy posting it from Turkey or somewhere, who knows where.
Yeah.
Then yeah. Think about it a little bit. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's frustrating, but it's prominent, and it's only going to get worse. It's not a There's not a solution to this, and all the pressure they put on the social media companies to fix it. It's not really a fixable problem. It's something that comes with the territory of the internet, and combating it is very, very difficult. And the ball is in the court of the attackers 95% of the time.
Yeah.
So we just have to deal with it in a lot of ways, right? It is what it is.
Well, we just gotta all ignore them. We all gotta learn to ignore them, so it doesn't actually ever take off, because it's so dumb. That's what you gotta do, is just be able to ignore it. But that's tricky. Not everyone's got the ammo, obviously.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to rant about that a little bit, and it's amazing to see how one person posts the video making the claim, and then other people pick it up and run with it, and then news organizations that are like not real news organizations, but they pick it up and they just run with it too, and it just keeps picking itself back up off the floor and continuing with its own momentum. Yeah, as soon as it seems like it's dead, somebody else grabs it. Like
a social media feedback loop, right? They're trying to engineer it so it basically can build up their numbers.
Yeah.
Anyways, shall we move on to Mauna Loa?
Yeah.
Real quick, wrap it up here. So Mauna Loa monitoring, not a whole lot has changed. I started off with this firms map that Dane pulled, and I thought I'd show it again here. Right, there it is. There's that Waikoloa brush fire. Here's Kilauea's summit heat signature, and just there is a little bit of Mauna Loa's heat. So that's really the most exciting thing we have is, you can still see a little bit of heat from the satellite, but that's really it. There's not any other change in the volcano, no change in the monitoring. I can show you that. Here is the tilt for the last week, showing not a lot of change in normal variations day to day. Longer term for the last month, it looks like it's still rising a bit here. And that corresponds with the GPS that we see north-south across the summit of Mauna Loa. And that, as we've said before, is consistent with historical patterns, right? So just that shows a volcano is refilling with magma. It's kind of recharging, rebounding, but it's not anywhere near erupting again yet, right? It has to do this for a while. Right? And after 1975, it did it for 9 years. After 1984, it did it for 38 years. So sometimes it can be as little as 1 year, 3 years, might be more average if you go back a couple hundred years, but the more recent average is longer than that. So all consistent, nothing to worry about there. Lava flows are just cooling the surface, nothing alarming underground occurring. Earthquakes are pretty much none, right? There's just background levels of earthquakes here. There's a cross section. Here's the whole last month. You see the south flank of it still moving as it always does, like Kilauea's earthquake counts for the last month. Pretty jagged through here, and here's the last year, right? So here's our eruptive era, and then or build up, right? And the eruption happens here. And since then, just about nothing. So still wouldn't be surprised at some point to see this volcano drop back down in elevation status and alert status. But we'll have to wait for the USGS clock to tick past that before it's a reality. So there's the last 5 years, and back down to here, and that is it for Mauna Loa. You can note the USGS update here from today. Not erupting, no changes, cooling, and no longer active. There's nothing really different to highlight from the previous weeks. So that is Mauna Loa. We can, as usual, recap our community events coming up. So in a national park, we have still 2 weeks in February. And what we have coming up is in Kahuku on Saturday, coffee talk on Ankylan Ponds, which is going to be interesting. And then ongoing programs as usual there. But the other one that's noted and added is also at Kahuku, is going to be stand-up comedian Ben Miller on the 25th from 11 a.m. to noon. So check that out. And then coming up in March, taiko drummers, healing with plants. We'll cover more of that, I suppose, as that ticks around too. So that is it, Dane. We can, of course, say our thank yous and discuss some questions,
All
huh?
right. Yeah. First, want to thank everybody that tuned out today. We rely on viewers like you to get, the information out there. We don't have an army of bots that propagate our stuff like the people that we were just showing you. So we rely on that organic, and the YouTube algorithm to do us favorably, but it's not exactly set up for that kind of stuff. But yeah, we appreciate everybody that turns out today. Like, subscribe, share, all that jazz. It really does help the channel. And we also have our content on HawaiiTracker.com, the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group. The Facebook group really is where a lot of the information gets shared. But the Hawaii Tracker webpage, it's just the meat, right? There's no filler. There's no pretty pictures. It's just reports, right? But check out those. Check us out on YouTube as well. And we'd also like to thank the County of Hawaii for, helping fund this type of content. They're enabling us to continue making these live stream short videos and all written articles as well. We really appreciate them stepping in and helping keep this type of information out there and going, right? So we don't have to do the clickbait nonsense that the game ends up trying to push you into, right? Instead, we can just speak what we, actually feel about the eruption and what is happening, and give you, something that's authentic. I think that gets us through those. We did have some super chats. Want to acknowledge those real quick. We had Benjamin, who came through with an $20 super chat. Says, thanks for the work, guys. Appreciate that. We had Chris Kiki come through with a $40 super chat and said, always appreciate all you do for keep us informed. Appreciate that as well. And then we had another one from Skugget Ed, who said, woot, $20. Appreciate that support there. Long-time viewers there. Appreciate all of you. All right. Let's do some questions, huh?
Yeah, do a couple.
We got a few here. We got a couple here. Maybe one. Mugsy asks, does the volcanic steam or gas get pushed downwards towards the lower lying areas of HPP, Hilo, Pahoa, etc., more when it rains?
I think it's all the wind direction, right? So the wind is what's we're going to bring it, and the wind can follow contours. If the wind's strong enough, it can go downhill and bring it downhill more. But it's more the wind direction than anything, I'd say, right? And so the rain itself, if it's raining through the plume, it might dissolve some of the gas, and you might have acid rain in that particular little area. But it's not something to worry about. When you have so much rain, it's going to be so little of it's going to be acid rain. It's going to all get diluted anyways, right? But I think the winds in particular, are when you can get the gases,
right,
in places where they might surprise you.
There's almost two little questions in that one, too. I'll address the first one, which is the volcanic steam, just the appearance of steam, right? Because that's different than what Phil's talking about. Phil's talking about the gases, which are pretty consistent, right? They come from death. But the steam is highly variable. Like what you actually see at the surface, it depends on the dew point, depends on the rain, depends on a whole bunch of factors to see how much you really see. So, generally speaking, in winter, in the mornings, after it rains, you're going to see more steam than you would in the summer after it doesn't, type of thing.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, for sure.
Right. I don't know if I got any other questions lined up.
Is that one from Freeman? Freeman?
Yeah. Oh yeah, Freeman asks, is the wall of the downdrop block being melted by the lava that is still molten underneath the crust?
Yeah, it's the heat of the lava pool that it's building over is certainly helping it not form that base underneath there, right? Especially the fact that the lava is agitated and bubbling and churning and all of that. So that ends up, so it's not so much that it's forming it and then it's melting it back, but it can't form underneath it, so it ends up building overhung, and then that's why it ends up falling in. So it's kind of similar in that way, right? But it's not actually forming all the way solid and then melting all the way. It's kind of not even forming on a chunk by chunk basis because of it, right? So it doesn't actually ever build up to really remelt. But the heat, as you describe it, Freeman, is really important, and the churning and all the agitation prevents it from sticking and actually building that base. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. We'll do one last question here. Michael asks, has lava in Mauna Loa completely drained, or is lava still in the crater?
So red lava is all hardened into the hard lava now, right? And whatever didn't come out is likely, I don't really like drain as much, right? But there probably was a little bit of draining there towards the end of stuff that didn't quite make it all the way out. It probably drained back in there. But for the most part, it's kind of hardened in place. Is mostly what's happened. It's mostly hardened in place. It's hardened in place in the summit area, fairly thin because it was only active there for the first few hours of the eruption, and it's hardened much thicker in the downslope areas towards the saddle road, and especially in that mid slope where it was kind of overflowing its channels and kind of breaking over and piling up over and over and over again. There, as well as the actual flow front itself is pretty thick. So those areas, I think we heard flow front might have been between 30 and 60 feet thick in some areas. So I mean, yeah, that's how come you can retain so much heat. Imagine 60 feet of a giant pile of lava, 60 feet thick. That's why it can retain heat. But it's, yeah, and the kind of draining, when I think of draining, like stuff going back in the ground, probably right when the fissure was dying off. And then whatever was still in the channels, it would drain downhill to make that pancake at the bottom much fatter as well. Right? That's kind of the last part of it. But now it's all kind of in place, just kind of cooling in place. It's not really moving anymore. It's just hot. And where it's thick, it's going to be hot for years, as residents of Kapoho can still attest today.
Right. All right. Well, I think that gets us through the questions. We appreciate everybody that tuned in today. Make sure to like, subscribe, share. We will be back next Thursday, at 5 p.m. Hawaiian Standard Time. That is our normal time we go live, unless something happens. We don't really expect it, but hey, you never know. And it'd have to be bigger than the Deep Hollow 4.8 to get us to go live, but that has happened before, and we will go live again. But if not, we will be back Thursday at 5. And I think that will do it for me, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. Yeah, I mean, a big earthquake could always change everything. You never can quite tell when they're going to happen, but if one does happen and it changes everything, then yeah, that's kind of thing that would bring us back online. One deep one, as Dane says, it didn't change anything, not going to do it. We put out alerts that nothing changed really, but we'll come on live. So yeah, as usual, great to bring you guys content one more week, and until next week, we'll recap Kilauea, any changes in Mauna Loa if any occur. And from HawaiiTracker.com, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong.